one of the things I know for sure that if you're in a management and leadership position, your decisions matter. And the decisions you make are going to impact the people that you manage. And if that's the case, if that's the truth, we have to learn the process of making good decisions. Okay, that was good. And hopefully you can see why that was good. And how that ties into decision making is that when we think about the decisions that we make, and the decisions that we make will determine the outcome of our life. The culmination of all of these little micro decisions that I've made from the time I was 18 until now have had a profound impact on who I am as a person. And certainly as a leader, those are really personal decisions. As a manager, the culmination of decisions that we make in our organization will determine our organization's ability to achieve its goals. If we're on the same grounds there, then we have to ask ourselves, well, how is it that we go about making decisions? And the answer to the question should not look like, oh, well, we're trying to get the best outcome. The answer to that question should more align with, well, we have a decision-making process. And in a decision-making process, the probability of us making a good decision is fairly high because our process is really good. And whether or not we can control the outcome of our decisions is not the point. That's a probabilities game because there's a lot of factors that can impact the the outcome. We talked about these environmental factors, we talked about resources, we talked about you know, catastrophic things that can happen to the business that are completely out of our control. But what is in our control, just like Michael Phelps, is not whether or not he wins a gold. It's the preparation that he puts in order to ensure that the probability of him getting a gold is high. So that's what we want to talk about with decisions. So what's a decision? A decision is a choice made from available alternatives. If there's not alternatives, if I have to, if I'm looking at a pizza and there's only one pizza in front of me, I don't have much of a choice. I'm going to eat the pizza. But if I'm looking at a pizza and there's a sausage pizza and a pepperoni pizza and a plain pizza, now I have a decision to make. So without the availability of alternatives, there's no such thing as a decision. A decision making is the process. I love how it's putting it in there of identifying problems, which is a big part of decision making, and opportunities, and then resolving them. So there's a lot in that because identifying problems is inherently baked into making good decisions. If we have, if we're in class tonight and for whatever reason I start breaking up and you guys can't hear me, you have to say to yourself, well, is this Claude's problem or is this my problem? Like, is it my internet connection or is it Claude's internet connection? So you're going to go through a process of trying to diagnose what the heck is going on. And your behaviors are going to be based on your understanding of the problem. And really what I mean by that is without a common understanding of the problem, the decision-making process to solve the problem can be very complex and can be very troublesome. So we have to be working from the same grounds, meaning identifying the same problem. So identifying the problem is really step number one. And these are the two different types of decisions. So let me pick on Emmanuel, Manny. This morning, you woke up and you decided that you were going to spend 30 minutes on the edge of your bed deciding whether or not you were going to brush your teeth, shave your face, or get some food. Is that correct? You spent 30 minutes figuring that out?
No,
No. How much time did you put into that decision?
no time. I would say
No
it's
time at all.
habit.
But at some
No.
point in your life, your parents or somebody had to, you know, probably sort out what's the most appropriate thing for you to do when you wake up in the morning. And over time, those decisions were programmed into you. These programmed decisions are not really decisions of consequence. They involve situations that have occurred often enough to enable decision rules to be developed and applied in the future. So if we're running a business and we have to order inventory, that's just a part of our job. Let's just make it real simple. We have to order office supplies. That fits within our job duties. And whenever the toner gets low or the paper gets low in the printer, we have an Amazon account. We just go on and we click the button. And even better, we have some reoccurring purchase that just does it for us. So that's a reoccurring decision. It's a program decision. We don't have to think about it. At some point, it was trained into us, and once it was trained into us, it's done. Those are not the decisions as managers that we want to focus on. What we want to focus on is these things called non-program decisions. These are decisions that have a level of uncertainty involved. These are decisions that are decisions of consequence. What do I mean by decisions of consequence? The decisions are essentially important. And if we don't make the right decision, or if we fail in our outcome, that we could suffer some level of consequence. It could be financial hurt. It could be our competitor gets a leg up on us. It could be that we make the wrong decision about purchasing a piece of equipment and therefore we don't have enough money to pay for our employees' payroll. And that's a problem. We have to lay people off. These are decisions that have consequences. So that these are the decisions that matter. So my wife and I are under contract to buy a house. praise God, we've had a condo for a long time, but hopefully we're going to close at the end of the month. But the reality is, this is a decision of consequence. You know, getting married, having kids, and having a mortgage and a job is a real thing. And once you start signing up for these decisions to say, you know, get a mortgage, that's a decision that has a consequence if you can't honor the payment plan on your mortgage. So these are important decisions that should probably be slowed down, should probably be analyzed, should probably be discussed, and likely have consequences associated with them if they're wrong decisions. Yeah, that's a great example. And the lawsuit would really be a consequence of making the decision to terminate them prior to paying them out. So prior to terminating them, you should probably have a conversation about HR. You should probably have a plan. You should probably talk about different alternatives, and you should certainly be prepared to terminate them under the regulations of California law. So
Right.
that's a good example.
Yeah.
And there's a level of risk and uncertainty is another thing that when we talk about decisions of consequence, sometimes we're taking a risk. There's no chance in the world we have all of the information that we need to make the right decision. If you think about if you satisfy something, you're going with the alternative that makes the most sense. Do you really have enough time? Say you're the Kevin's example, you're leading, say, 15 people in California, and one of them clearly has escalated to the point where you've had a conversation with them, you had another one, you wrote them up. Now they got a consequence of, like, say they were suspended for 3 days, and now you have to let them go. It's clear, it's pretty cut and dry. You can't spend 3 days analyzing that decision. You have to move forward with it. And there's going to be a level of risk involved. There's going to be a level of uncertainty involved. When we had to terminate someone, and I shared the story on my YouTube channel, and it's got like 600 views, and I just simply shared a story about how to terminate somebody, or a time I had to let someone go, an employee that acted very emotionally disparaging. So he worked with us for about 7 years, and he was a supervisor with a landscape company, and he went about doing his job pretty poorly, and he all of a sudden his team started falling off. He wasn't productive, he wasn't invoicing work, and most people on the team were kind of rolling their eyes and saying he's not leading us or managing us. So we had a multitude of conversations. Eventually I had to let him go. So when I called him to ask him to come in the office because I was clearly going to terminate him, he decided that he was going to sort of abruptly hang up on me, take the company vehicle that has a GPS on it that we own to his house, unload company tools from his truck that we own at his house. When I asked him to come to the office, I can clearly see he's at his house. So now I'm even more heightened about him coming to the office. What's this going to look like? I know he has a license to carry. I know that he is an interesting guy, and I understand that he's upset. So now he's coming to the office, and I have to get my. I had a security guard at the office. He was actually an ex-police officer, and he was a mechanic, but he became my security guard for that conversation. He I had an HR guy sitting next to me in the office preparing for this conversation with this gentleman. I was fully ready for some emotional response. So now we see him. We know we're tracking him on GPS, and he's coming into the fence area of our facility. And he's speeding and screeching his wheels, and he drives up onto the loading dock. And when you drive onto a loading dock, it's like a boss move. You don't drive onto a loading dock unless you know, unless you're loading something. Well, yeah, loading is loading on the bottom of the dock, but the point is people just don't do it unless they have to, or unloading something. So he speeds up onto there. He hits his brakes. His doors are wide open. He's blaring like rap music, and he comes out of his car. He leaves his door open. He walks full head of steam into the office, and I'm like, whoa! Like, I stand up and I'm like,
That's
hey
crazy.
man, you got to settle down. And this is the kinds of decisions that need to be made with a level of uncertainty and risk. And I hate to use it as an example of people and how they respond, but sometimes termination decisions come with uncertainty and risk. And I think that I'm happy you brought that example up, Kevin. So that's another part of this. Certainty is a situation in which all information the decision maker needs is fully available. So if I speak, I'm pretty sure that my computer is going to pick up my voice and it's going to be transmitted to you. I'm pretty certain of that. So I make the decision to speak. Certainty brings a level of what would be considered um, lack of ambiguity, and it brings no anxiety. Like, when you can provide certainty, that's a good thing. But as managers, we deal with uncertainty. We have to learn how to deal with uncertainty. We have to learn how to deal with risk in an appropriate way. Everything can't be certain. It's not always going to work out the way we want it to work out. So we have to be okay with that. One of my favorite diagrams. It's not one of my favorite, but okay. So you see the gray part here. You got the programmed and non-programmed decisions. If you look at that for a second, the non-programmed decisions obviously are a lot more difficult. Those are the decisions of consequence, and the programmed decisions are fairly easy. So then look at the red box. You have the possibility of failure is pretty low because you have certainty. The possibility of failure starts moving up as decisions become more non-programmed, they become more ambiguous, and there's a higher level of failure. So we have to realize that if we're talking here today about non-programmed decisions, there is a chance we're going to make the wrong decisions. Again, going back to what do we do about it? We have to have a good process in order to make the most effective decisions. Ambiguity, great word to not have to deal with. You don't want to deal with ambiguity, but it's a great word to say if you understand that we don't have all the information in order to make the right decision, and understanding that there will be a level of ambiguity. We obviously want to decrease this as much as possible. So this says goals to be achieved or problems to be solved are unclear, alternatives are difficult to define, and information about outcomes is unavailable. Man, that's tough. I'm trying to think of if anyone bought a used car from like a car lot or a hustler that just seems to like he's selling this Cadillac, 1965 Cadillac. It looks like it's in pristine shape. You take it for a test drive, it runs great. There's a strong possibility you're going to pull that thing off the lot. You're going to get it to your house and it's going to blow up that night. Like there's no telling really what's going to happen. So how do you decrease ambiguity? Well, you take it to a Carfax, you get it to a mechanic, you ask for the ability to drive around for 2 days instead of 2 hours. You do the things you can do to try to decrease the amount of unclear information. You try to have problems that are easy to define. If a mechanic sees something that is very clear, it's like think about getting an inspection on a house. Like these are certified inspectors. They can see if there's issues and information about outcomes. When I move into the house, when I buy this car, I'm pretty sure that the outcome is going to be better because of the process I went through to decrease my ambiguity. Wicked decision problems, highly ambiguous situations involving conflict over goals and decision alternatives, rapidly changing circumstances, fuzzy information, unclear links among decision elements, and the inability to evaluate whether a proposed solution will work. Often no right answer. So the hairy or fuzzy problems, whatever that was defined as, the difference between a good manager and a great manager is learning how to attack that appropriately. So hopefully we're going to talk about how to attack those decision making alternatives or ways in which to go about making decisions with those kinds of problems as the chapter unravels. So there's a couple different approaches to decision making: classical, administrative, and political. And we're going to talk about each one of those. Classical model based on rational economic assumptions and managers' belief about what ideal decision making should be. So that's a wonderful scene to demonstrate the impact of anxiety in decision making. And there's a couple different roles in that scenario. There's the role of the contestant who does not have access to all of the information. And then there's the role of the banker. And the banker has all of the information they need to make the most appropriate decision with probability and rationale. So the banker is going to make an offer that is based on an algorithm that they have, and they're not anxious. They just, every time a case opens up, their algorithm shifts, they have an offer, they're going to make the offer. And the contestant, though, is not privy to all that information. So there's two alternatives here. There's really the classic model that the banker is making based on rational economic assumptions and managers believe about the ideal decision making should be, what the ideal decision should be. So the manager is saying, I have all the information, I have all the analysis, I always have access to this, and I believe that this is how I should manage, and this is what I'm going to do. Then there's the normative approach to how a decision maker should make a decision. Is another one, but one of the assumptions of this classic decision making model, again, think about the banker. Decision maker operates to accomplish known goals, problems are defined. This contestant has X amount of cases open. This contestant has X amount of cases that aren't open. Here's the probability. The goal is to get them to go home with the least amount of money. Boom. Decision maker strives for certainty and gathers information. Results are calculated. That's the banker. Criteria for evaluation of alternatives are known. Selects alternatives that maximizes economic return, meaning give them the least amount of money so we can keep the most amount of money. Decision maker is rational and uses logic. Decision maximizes attainment of organizational goals. That is an idealistic view on decision making. It's a classical model because we used to believe from an economic perspective that people make the most rational decisions. And over time, people tend to make the culmination of their decision tend to be somewhat rational. But the reality is short-term spikes in the stock market have nothing to do with the performance of these businesses. It has everything to do with the people's perceptions of the future performance of the business. It's very short-term views of stock market are very irrational. And it happens because of trends, market fears, this kind of stuff. So the truth is human beings are rational and irrational. And the administrative model might make more sense for us to think about. So the administrative model, use of rational decision-making process within the limits of human and environmental factors. Descriptive, how managers actually make decisions in complex situations. There's something called bounded rationality. It's a big one. People have limits or boundaries on how rational they can be. Personality types that are high on, say, neuroticism, have emotion involved in their personality, tend to be a little bit more irrational in their decision-making. And because emotion is involved. And so they have limits. Satisficing, which I mentioned this word earlier, is choosing the first solution that satisfies minimal decision criteria. So on the way home today, I had a couple turns I had to make, and the GPS gave me some alternatives to make different turns that'll get me to the same location. Um, the reality is I satisfies for the blue one, the easiest one. I don't want to sit down and calculate how many different turns I need to make. I just want to go with the one that's easiest and most clear. So if you let's put this in a practical situation for somebody in class, say that's managing a restaurant or works within a restaurant, yeah, it might be a good time for you to go to the table and ask people what they would like to eat. But what are you going to do? Calculate how much time from the time they got in until now and gather all the facts and all the information, or are you just going to go ahead and just make the decision based on what you see, based on the fact that they're at the table, they sat down, and maybe they want to order. So the more logical, not the more logical, the more practical way people make decisions is using this administrative model. So whether you believe in a classical model or the administrative model is sort of up to you, and you can see the differences in the process in which people go to make decisions. So this isn't really a process. This is more of understanding the thought process behind decisions and behind information and behind rational versus emotional decisions. So this this administrative model you can think of as the person on Deal or No Deal that has to make the decision that's being pressured. Their mom is like, "Oh my gosh, take the money," and she's saying, "Well, I don't know if I should take the money," and then this guy over here is saying, "Well, you better make a decision," and there's emotion involved. So that happens too as managers. People are pressuring us from all different sides. Goals are often vague and conflicting. Managers are often unaware of problems or opportunities. This is the person that has to select the button, deal or no deal. This is not the banker. Rational procedures are not always used. Simplistic view of problems. Managers' searches for alternatives are limited. Most managers settle for satisfies me. Perfect example of the lady who had to make that decision. Intuition, great one. I'm going to show you another video. It's actually might seem a bit narcissistic, but it's me talking on the video. But it's a great example, and because I enjoy this concept of intuition very much so. Hopefully, let's see if I can play the audio from the apps. Audio. Basic, advanced, files, apps, share sound. Okay, the quality of the sound might come in a bit better. Optimize for video clips. Optimize screen sharing for viewing video clips. Sure.
So intuition is the feelings, beliefs, and hunches that come readily to mind, requiring little effort and information gathering as a result in on-the-spot decisions. The best example of intuition, if you think about it, is there's a story about a race car driver. He's been racing in NASCAR for, say, 15 years as a race car driver. He's won 2 or 3 different big races. He has driven this particular lap of 28 times that day. He knows the track. He knows his car. He knows his competitors. Intuition happened when he was driving his car, and he noticed that the entire stadium, instead of looking at him as he came around the corner, he noticed that the stadium was actually looking ahead at something. And he also noticed a little bit of a quietness to the stadium. So 2 things, very, very subtle differences in the environment around him because of his intuition, because he's done it so many times. He sensed that he should probably hit his brakes because he felt as if there was something up ahead that he should be weary of. And he had 2 or 3 seconds to make this decision. And because he hit his brakes, he avoided a major accident that had just happened right in front of him. And he was able to slow down in time to not be a part of that accident. That is the definition of intuition. You just have experienced something that things are just not right. My wife, on a multitude of occasions, when she had her second baby versus her first baby, she had this intuition of the health of the child, of the birth, when the child was going to come early, because she felt this baby inside of her. It's something that she had done before, and she just sort of knew. She didn't know factually. She just sort of knew a feeling, belief, and hunch that comes readily to mind, requiring little effort and information gathering as a result of on-spot decisions. This is important for managers to build up intuition.
Cool, makes sense, and saves me some time for sharing the story myself. But and I would ask more questions if we had the time and if we weren't on Zoom. But it's so important that we listen to the spider sense. And intuition is built up with experience, and experience brings wisdom. And my father would say all the time that he would meet people that we would interview and hire, and he would just say, I just don't, something not right about this person. And sometimes we would hire that person, and without a doubt, almost every single time, there was something not right about this person. And that eventually came to roost. So there's an understanding that these little nuances that are hard to notice, but we notice them, need to be paid attention to as well. It's completely trumps the whole thing about gathering information and going through a process and all that kind of stuff. If there is something that from your experience you notice that maybe it's hard to articulate that isn't right, don't shy away from that feeling and bring that about, but just call it what it is. It's called, hey, my intuition is saying this or that or whatever. Quasi rationality, combining intuitive and analytical thought. I like that. Combining intuition and analytics. Hey, here's what my intuition says, but let's take a look at the numbers. That's from the administrative model. Political model. Building coalitions. We were just talking about this today, and sometimes these organizations are difficult to process decisions through. So we have to learn how to be somewhat political in the way in which we go about as, say, middle managers, or even sometimes as executives to make decisions in an organization, because there's a lot of stakeholders that have power and influence, and it's not always easy to get stuff done. I sit on the board of my condominium association, it's an HOA, and I'm the vice president of the board of directors. So you would think I'm second in command to making decisions. So if the president says something and then I say something, it should be a done deal. No, that's not the case. There is a slew of other constituents that we need to consider, and we need to make sure that it falls within the minute notes of the meetings, and we have to get a vote with consensus. It's a whole thing. So it's quite frustrating for entrepreneurs, but sometimes we have to appreciate and understand this process as well. So useful for non-program decisions when conditions are uncertain, information is limited, and there's manager conflict about goals to pursue or actions to take, resembles the real environment. Coalition is an informal alliance. This is a good word to remember among managers who support specific goals. Without a coalition, powerful groups can derail the decision-making process. So what does it mean to have a coalition? So in this class, you all band together and you decide that you're going to tell me that I can only put 25 questions on the test. And I'm saying I'm going to put 30. Well, you say, well, I appreciate that, professor, but me and these other 5 students have signed a petition that we all disagree with 30 questions, and we stated all the reasons why, and us 5 want 25 questions, whatever that looks like. I know it's kind of a silly thing to think of, but that coalition, that the formalization of that coalition has some clout. Hey, you've done your work, you've gathered together. It's sort of like a union, but not union, but you've built some consensus amongst a small group, and you're speaking on behalf of this small group, and you're wanting something to happen. That happens all the time in big organizations, all the time. So to the power of building coalitions, doing it in a professional way, and presenting those decision-making processes to a leader or manager in a professional way is a powerful way to get stuff done. Organizations are made up of groups with diverse interests, goals, and values. It couldn't be more true. Information is ambiguous and incomplete. Managers do not have the time, resources, or mental capability to identify all dimensions and process all information regarding the problem. So the political model is very similar to the administrative model. Here are just the 3 models sort of summed up everything that we talked about. This is a fun one. You talk about a process of making decisions. How you go through this process, like step number 1, recognition of decision requirement. There could be a process that you go about to recognize, is there a decision that's needed to be made? So that's number 1. Is there a decision that needs to be made? Well, are there alternatives? Is there uncertainty? Is there going to be some conflict in making this decision? Or does everybody unanimously think it's door number A or door number 1? If everybody 100% of the organizations think that, there's no decision to make. You just pick door number 1. But if there's going to be some conflict, there's some disagreement, is there some uncertainty? Okay, there's a decision that needs to be made. And obviously this decision that we make is going to have a consequence. We need to start thinking about this thing. Number 2 is diagnosis and analysis of causes. Okay, what's the problem? Why is this happening? Are we on the same page of what the problem is? We're not talking about symptoms, we're talking about problems. You go to a doctor, and the doctor, you say, I got a headache. The doctor doesn't say, oh, well, here's some Advil, go home. No, I mean, that would be treating the symptom of the problem. The doctor probably says, oh, okay, well, how much have you drank in the last couple of days? And are you experiencing any fevers, or how are you sleeping, or what kind of stress level are you experiencing at home? That they're trying to ask questions to get at the root of the problem, the iceberg, not the tip. The tip is the symptom, the iceberg is the actual problem. So that's the diagnosis and cause of the situation at hand that needs a decision. Starts with the diagnosis of the problem. Development of alternatives. Okay, we identified a problem. Now, what in the heck are we going to do about it? Here's 3 different paths we can choose. Selection of desired alternatives. All right, out of these 3 different paths, we've done our due diligence, and we've realized that this is the right path to go. Now we have to choose it. Once we choose it, then we have to implement it. Okay, now that we've implemented this particular path, who's going to do what? How's that going to look like? What's the time frame? How much resources are needed to be done or needed to be used? And then you're not even done there. I mean, you think making decisions is easy. It's not that easy. So now we're at step number 6, which evaluation and feedback. Now we've made a decision based on this process. We've implemented that decision. Now we have to look, did it work? Was it the right decision? Could we have done it better? If it was great, we celebrate success. If it was wrong, we look at what happened. And then hopefully that will inform us in the future. As you can see, it's a cycle of this decision-making process. So we do a better job in the future of making decisions. I'd like to use the example of, asking the wrong date out the prom. And I don't know if the high school still have prom these days, but my high school had a prom and I had a decision to make. I was either going to ask this girl or this girl. And I went to prom my junior year and senior year. And the lady that, well, just use a fictitious example of walking through the process of, okay, I'm going to ask this girl, and here's how I'm going to ask her, and here's what's going to happen. And then you go through the process of picking her up and getting a suit and, making sure that she's got her flower and the corsage or something like that. And then you go to the prom and you kind of dance together and you sort of feel each other out throughout the night and you decide whether or not you have a connection, and then you move on with your life. But the reality is that could go horribly wrong. There's so many steps in that. that you may have asked the wrong person out to prom, and you show up to their house and you witness something that you're like, what was that? And then on the ride over to prom, you see some behaviors that you're just like, man, that was that normal? I'll just forget about it. And then you go to dance and she's just not a very good dancer at all. And then you have a decision to make next year as to whether you ask her to prom again. And if you say yes and just ignore everything you just experienced, you probably didn't learn much from your decision-making process, and you probably haven't adjusted along the way. So I don't know if that example kind of lands with you, but if you can see the relevancy of learning from good decisions and learning from bad decisions so that it can inform your decision-making process in the future, then you could probably understand that. Actually, I don't think I had a bad prom decision, but I've seen movies and I've heard stories about prom decisions that have gone terribly wrong, where towards the end of the night, people are just in places they never expected to be, and it's usually because of the person they asked to go to prom with them. It's like, well, how's that decision? Eventually, I learned how to get a better decision-making process and learn about my impact on the process and learn what was most important to me. So yes, I made the best decision of my life in asking my wife to marry me. That's a big win for sure. And again, for those of you who haven't or aren't married, you still have ample time to figure out this decision making process. And now you can see, and I love using the content in the class in their personal life because it transfers. If you can become a good decision maker at work, you can apply some of these same premises. I know it sounds corny to your personal life, and you can go about making better decisions so that you have fewer regrets in your life. Recognition of decision. Okay, we walked through these processes already. Personal decision framework. Situation, decision choice, and personal decision style. So these are actually I say quite a lot, but we talked about the situation being the program, non-program, classical, administrative, political mile, and the steps. So that's what we just went over in the green box. Now this personal decision style, which we'll unpack in a second, is directive, analytical, conceptual, or behavioral. These are fun. And these types of decision-making styles, hopefully maybe we can see that we tend to go more towards one than the other. And the combination of our personal decision-making styles with the way in which we go about making decisions is going to lead us to some level of choice. All right, so let me ask these questions. Just think about yourself for a second. Here's what a decision-making style is. Distinctions among people with respect to how they evaluate problems, generate alternatives, and make choices. So my wife and I are different, and which is a good thing. So we look at things, we perceive things differently. So there's 4 styles. Ask yourself this question. Do you prefer simple, clear-cut solutions to problems? Yes or no? If you prefer simple, clear-cut solutions to problems, you probably have a more directive decision-making style. Ask yourself this question. Do you base decisions on all available rational data? So are you waiting till you get that email from that person that has that little bit of information so you can apply it to your Excel analysis to develop the right chart, and you're hesitant to make a decision until all of the data is available? That would be, if that's the case, you're more of an analytical style. Do you use a broad amount of information to solve problems creatively? So you can pull information from different sources, and you're thinking like you have a whiteboard in your mind and you're drawing a picture over here, but then you see this flash of lightning over here, and all of a sudden you're onto a different thought. If that's the case, you're more of a conceptual style of decision making. You're a conceptual thinker, more strategic. And so then the last one is behavioral style. You exhibit a deep concern regarding the effect of your decision on other people. It's not about me, it's about somebody else. So if I asked the wrong person out to the prom, I'm not upset about me. I'm upset for them. Like I'm worried that I didn't, I'm not good here and that there's something wrong with me. And I'm really concerned with how this decision has impacted you. If that's true of you, if you want other people to do well and you're afraid to hurt other people with your bad decisions, you probably have more of a behavioral style. So that's just a cool way to look at it. Of we have a propensity to lean towards these types of styles when we make decisions. And it's good to be self-aware of those things. Why do managers make bad decisions? This is a really fascinating social science component of this process. And since political season is coming about, we all have the right to vote. So how we go about making our decisions to vote is a decision-making process. And a lot of the times we fall victim, it's not just in our voting decision, but it's in all decisions, to these things called biases. And I'll never forget when I went to it was actually my first lunch with these partners that I was going into business with. And they weren't my bosses, they were partners. And we had to work on this project together. But it was a pretty important project. It lasted 3 months. And the first lunch I had with them, after like this courting process, which was great, and we were really excited about the future of working together, I sat down with them and there was a lady at the lunch, and I was explaining some of the things that I had in mind or some ideas I had. And she looked at me and she goes, I think you need to check your biases. And I was like, excuse me, like, what did you just say? And it was really the way in which he said it was not appropriate, and it was judgmental, and still to this day, obviously I remember it. She's being a you know what, but the reality is she had a point that she saw things from a different perspective, and my biases were clouding my judgment of how I saw things. And here are some of those biases that tend to happen. Anchoring bias occurs when we allow initial impressions, statistics, and estimates to act as anchors to our subsequent thoughts and judgments. Here's an example. Did the Roman Empire fall in before or after 700 AD? Does anybody know? But here's the point. The 700 AD was an anchor. What I did there was I sort of anchored you around 700 AD. So it could literally be way before, but the fact that I anchored you there affected the way you thought about that problem. So again, it's just an example. If somebody's looked it up, just let me know. But um, another example would be that, hey, we're going to do this project and we have a budget for this project. And we want to make sure the project is done really well. It's going to be the best. We'll say we're planning a wedding. And I want you all to come up with a budget for the wedding. But I think the budget should be around $30,000. And then I walk out of the room. So your creative thinking and your mindset and your ability to even be constrained, like you could put on just as good of a wedding for 15,000. Or you could have very well designed the best, most extravagant wedding in the whole world for 32,000. But the fact that I said 30,000 in your mind anchored you on a number that's going to mess you up. So that's called an anchoring bias. That's a very interesting one to think of. So try not to fall victim to that. And they do it a lot of times with cars. When you go to the car lot, what do you see on a sticker price? What is it called?
MSRP.
It's the MSRP. Why do they put the MSRP on there?
To grab
To
your
give you
attention.
to give you an idea as to what the car costs.
Or if we're prudent to these concepts, to anchor you. To anchor you on the start of the negotiation, because you can very well, first of all, we have no idea what that car actually cost a lot to actually purchase. So it'd be wise of us to figure out how much did this dealership pay to have this car sit on their lot, because that's what dealerships do. It's a tactic, and it's an effective tactic a lot of times, is to have that retail price, I guess you can say. And sometimes you can move the retail price if you're have, say, a buying power. But sometimes you're just a consumer and that's the price. And if you don't like it, you can leave. So it depends. So loss aversion is, if I ask you the question, you have a chance of winning. It's very similar to Deal or No Deal. You have a chance of winning $1 million. So you have a 30% chance of winning $1 million. But you have an 80% chance of winning $100,000. Which one do you choose?
100,000.
It depends on the individual.
So you settle for the sure thing. Let's just say you go for the million. You don't get it. You feel like you just lost $100,000. So our propensity to fear a loss is much higher than our desire to take a risk to go for the gain. So that's kind of the point. We just don't want to lose what we already have. And this is why sometimes entrepreneurs and certain people that are willing to take these risks and are comfortable with it tend to be more successful, because they're okay with losing stuff. You hear all of these stories about these billionaires at one point in their life went bankrupt, and it's, it kind of built a capacity in them to say, hey, if I lost everything, I'll get it back. And so that's the point. The reality is the 30% gain of $1 million is a 30% gain of $1 million. So not to roll that dice is a futile effort. I mean, I can even bring it up to say 90%, you get $100,000. So it's almost like a sure thing of $100,000, or a 50-50 on $1 million. So it's like, you do the math, and over time you're going to make $100,000 in hopefully like 2 or 3 years of work. But $1 million, to win that in one day, is a significant return on investment. So to have a 50% chance to win $1 million, you get the point. Confirmation bias is one of my favorites. I'll say from my perspective, I seek out information that already conforms with what I thought. So I have the desire to buy a house in this neighborhood. So what am I looking for in that neighborhood? I'm looking for police reports that say it's safe. I'm looking for parental reviews on school systems that say it's got a great school system. And I'm looking for other things that I can pull out that verify what I already think about that area. What I'm not looking for is all of the other things that are bad about that area. So occurs when a manager puts too much value on evidence that is consistent with a favored belief or viewpoint and discounts evidence that contradicts it. So a lot of times you can think about this from a spiritual perspective, a scientific perspective. The truth is, in science, one of the biggest why I love science, and I also am a man of faith too. So there's an element of science that only goes so far. Science is meant to disprove things. It's not even meant to disprove or prove. It's meant to find all of the reasons why something can be untrue. So you come up with a theory and you say, hey, listen, I think that everyone that wears white shirts tends to be more conscientious, which is like orderly. So orderliness, white shirts. I believe that they correlate. Okay, let me go out and find all of the reason why that is not true. All of the all of the evidence, I'm going to gather as much as I can, and I'm going to try my best to demonstrate why this isn't true. And once I can dispense with all of that, and I realize that, well, there's not a lot of evidence out there that says this isn't true, so I settle for the fact that this is true. It's got a margin of error that is low enough for me to say this is probably a valid correlation. So that's why science is tends or tries to be unbiased. And this is why it's very important for scientists to not have a confirmation bias, because you don't want somebody that's going to treat your daughter with medicine to initially have thought that this is probably good for kids. And then they find all of the reasons why this is good for kids. And they don't even pay attention to the things that make it not good for kids. So you can see why confirmation bias is a real powerful one, and how the process, the decision-making process, could weed out that confirmation bias, as I articulated how the scientific method does that. Perpetuating the status quo, being influenced by emotions, and being overconfident. There's a guy that was a mountaineer, and he had scaled this mountain. I think it was Mount Everest. This is a real story. Many, many times in the last 2 or 3 years, under conditions that were very favorable. And every single team he brought up, Mount Everest, summited the mountain. So they all made it to the top. And so now he was on this team, and the weather conditions weren't the same. And he was forcing this team and driving this team hard, and he had all the belief in himself, and he believed that this team can make it up there. And he said some pretty crass stuff along the way. And that overconfidence actually led to half of the people on that mountain campaign died. And it was because of his overconfidence. So overconfidence in making decisions can also be a bias that we can fall victim to. So there's some ways to go about these techniques to weed out these biases, and ways in which when we go about making decisions in our personal and professional lives, we can use brainstorming, electronic brainstorming, evidence-based decision-making, a commitment to make more informed and intelligent decisions based on best available facts and evidence. We can appoint a devil's advocate, which I think some of you have seen or understood before. It's really you bring a person into a meeting to point out, or into a decision-making process, point out all the things that are wrong with this decision, or all the things that could potentially go wrong with this decision. And another great example, if we had more time, I would use it, but I want to jump to chapter 7, at least touch on it, because I want to make sure we get through that for the test. But groupthink is something that is very, very difficult in our society. And when I say that is there are major important decisions to be made, like the Challenger shuttle that was launched. And if anyone remembers the Challenger shuttle that was launched, it actually exploded, and there was a school teacher on it, I believe. And one of the reasons why they decided to launch that shuttle, they had a lot of evidence saying that this was going to be a disaster, but they ignored the evidence. And it was because of groupthink. It's the tendency of people in groups to suppress contrary opinions. So another interesting one was an experiment where they had a guy. I don't know if this is a good example for groupthink, but I think it'll play into the essence. They had a guy wearing a doctor's outfit, and they brought him into a room, and it was an experiment. And the guy wearing the doctor's outfit was instructing the participant in the experiment to press a button that was administering shocks to another person in the other room. They couldn't see the other person, but they could hear the other person. So because this guy had a doctor's outfit, and because this guy seemed official, and because this guy was asking somebody to do something, this experiment was crazy with the human psyche. The person would sit there and administer shocks to the point where they would really be hurting the other person in the room. But just because some person of authority was telling them to do something, they suppressed the contrary opinion of the participant in the experiment to say, wait a minute, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stand up here and say, absolutely not. One of my favorite quotes, I think I did it in the last lectures, by Albert Einstein, that I'm not afraid of a world with evil people. I'm afraid of a world where good people watch evil and do nothing. Something like that, of sitting around and not making a choice to confront whatever isn't right. And that's, a lot of people tend to fall into that mindset, which is groupthink. They're just like, you know what? I'm afraid that if I say my opinion, that I'm just going to be looked at like I'm crazy. So I'm just going to shut up and not say anything. And then meanwhile, a shuttle is launched and people die. So that's sort of the essence of groupthink. I know that was pretty, I would say, dramatic how I just described that, but sometimes it can be dramatic. Escalating commitment is when we have put resources into something. So instead of, when we realize that this decision is probably the wrong decision, let's say that you're going to buy a house, or say a piece of commercial property, and that this team of people within your organization has gone through a month-long process of due diligence, all this kind of stuff, and that everything checks out, but for whatever reason, the last inspection that they did, they found asbestos in the walls. And you're just like, you know what? Just forget it. Let's just close on the property. Let's just keep moving forward. So the reality is, wait a minute, we have new information here. That we need to take a step back and evaluate this decision based on this new information. But oh no, let's just keep going and let's just go ahead and make it. So it's continuing to invest time and money in a solution, even when there's a strong evidence that it is not appropriate. So are we capable of taking new evidence into consideration and not just completely escalating our commitment? We can take a step back. Post-mortem is, or after action review. This is big in the military. It's discipline procedure whereby managers invest time in reviewing the results of decisions on a regular basis and learn from them. After action review. Post-mortem is purposefully imagine a decision has been implemented and has failed miserably, and then identifying reasons for the failure so that problematic issues can be addressed in advance. So God forbid some crazy infectious disease comes over from a different country and we have to scramble to find a vaccine, or we have to scramble to find how to contaminate or contain this disease. And we have to look for all the things that we're going to do to make sure that we're prepared for this. We have to work with the CDC. So if, say, the US did a better job with that prior to COVID, they would have probably been able to, let's just say, respond better or more appropriately, whatever that looks like. I just use that example because it's just a relevant example for what could happen in your organization if you make a decision and say it was the wrong decision. What's the worst that can happen? If you can envision that kind of stuff, then you can probably prepare for the worst thing to happen, and you can be more confident making a decision, knowing that God forbid it fails, that we certainly are prepared for that as well. That's called pre-mortem. Post-mortem is after the decision. Pre-mortem is, hey, this, something bad might happen, and let's think about it, whatever that looks like. Okay, cool. We got 15 minutes left, so bear with me as I as I efficaciously instruct as your professor of credibility through this next section of
As we barrel through chapter 7.
All right, I like setting it up. And I think the setup here is a shift because we've now officially gone through something called planning. And congratulations, you've made it through the first of 4 major steps in management. And planning is a big one. And it's one of the most important ones. And now you've made a decision and you've planned and you've implemented. And I guess you haven't implemented yet, but the part of implementation is organizing. And so once we've gone through the planning process, we found the strategy, we understand the environment, we understand the resources we have. Now we have to begin this process of organizing, the deployment of organizational resources to achieve strategic goals. So how do we deploy these resources? One of my favorite, my new favorite, because I get a new favorite every day. It's like the flavor of the month, ice cream, that is. A little story about the need for managers is, let's just say, if all of us at one particular time wanted to lift a car, let's just say, we could probably collaborate amongst one another and lift a car. That's awesome. But the truth is that amongst all of us, the 10 of us, we could probably do more than just lift a car if our collaboration was coordinated. I'll say that one more time. Collaboration is fairly straightforward amongst a group of people. You can collaborate, but to make collaboration the most effective, you have to have somebody that helps coordinate the collaboration. I know it sounds confusing, but if you can piece that together in your mind, it makes perfect sense. If a person is good at coordinating our collaboration, we can be more effective. And that's what organizing is. It's coordinating collaboration. And that's why managers are needed, because managers are good coordinators of collaboration. And they're good coordinators of resources. They're good coordinators of people. They're good coordinators of missions and goals and strategies. Organizing is important because it follows from strategy. Strategy defines what to do. The organizing defines how we do it. Okay, so now we know the organizational why. We got the mission, the vision. Now we know the what, which is the goals, planning. And now we have to figure out, well, how do we execute on this? What departments do we have? How does the work flow through this organization? That's the organizational structure, the set of formal tasks assigned to individuals and departments, formal reporting relationships, the design of systems to ensure effective coordination. Remember that word? Actually, I said collaboration. Coordination. Sorry, coordination is, okay. Employees across departments, the word coordination, very important. Organization chart, everybody hears this and says this, and it's just a visual representation of an organization structure. It's nothing more than that. It's just to show you how our organization is structured so that we can get tasks done here and hopefully do it the most effectively. So sample of an organizational chart. This is an old school sample. It's pretty much a hierarchy. You got the president. You got 4 people that are the direct reports to the president, the vice president, the director of human resources, the vice president of production, and the director of marketing. And then you have some of the people that work underneath them. What you notice here is that the president is ultimately accountable for the entire organization. As you can see, everyone falls under their chain of command. But the other reality is the vice president over here has people on their team that have nothing. Sorry, vice president of accounting has people on their team that have nothing to do with the director of marketing. So if, let's just say, the mountain region salesperson, which falls under the director of marketing, the mountain region salesperson tries to tell the information center, which is under the vice president of accounting, what to do. So that's kind of a problem because they don't have that authority, that legitimate power. They fall under different departments. There's a good thing about that, and there's a bad thing about that. It's a hierarchical, what would be more centralized chain of command. Division of labor and chain of command is the division of labor is the degree to which organizational tasks are subdivided into separate jobs, like accounting, human resources, production, and marketing, sort of subdivided into these different jobs. And underneath human resources, you got the benefits administrator, and you got the industrial relations manager. Division of labor, the degree to which organization tasks are subdivided into separate jobs. Losing popularity because too much specialization leads to employee isolation and boredom. Interesting. That's a trend that's happening in some of the research. But chain of command, an unbroken line of authority that links all employees in an organization and shows who reports to whom. The chain of command for the payroll clerk down here underneath the vice president of accounting, the information center, financial analyst, and chief accountant all work together on one team, and they're accountable to the vice president of accounting. The accounts payable person and payroll clerk are on the same team, and they're accountable to the chief accountant. The chief accountant has 2 direct reports. The vice president has 3 direct reports. The information center has no direct reports. Financial analyst has no direct reports. The chief accountant has 2 direct reports. That's the chain of command, if you think about it that way. And the chain of command you can see is represented in the organizational chart or the organizational structure. And why it's important, a lot of conflict can happen in organizations if duties, roles, and responsibilities are not clear. And if there's ambiguity in tasks or ambiguity in job design, you're going to have some overlap, which can create conflict. So sometimes it's a good thing. We'll talk about other organizational charts where it's like, well, okay, we'll deal with it, figure it out, and get into the octagon, and the best person who comes out wins. Like that. That's kind of extreme. But the point is, sometimes creating that conflict can create better decisions. But we'll talk about that in a second. Authority is the formal and legitimate right of a manager to make decisions, issue orders, and allocate resources to achieve organizational desired outcomes. Authority is vested in the organizational position, not people. So the authority is invested in the vice president, not the person. So the authority means I have the position to do something. I have the title, the legitimate authority to do something. Authority flows down the vertical hierarchy. Authority is accepted by subordinates. It sort of has to be. This is a fun one to think about, the difference between responsibility and accountability. Responsibility is the duty to perform the task or activity as assigned. I have the responsibility to do this, but accountability is the mechanism through which authority and responsibility are aligned. So ultimately, the president of this organization is accountable for everything. But the vice president of accounting is accountable for whatever is underneath them, and they have the responsibility for managing what's underneath them, but they do not have the responsibility of managing what the marketing person is managing. And nor do they have the authority to tell the marketing person what to do. So I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds here, but there's a difference in responsibility and accountability. And one of the major things to take away from, and this took me about 28 and a half years to understand. So it's very difficult to assign responsibility without also assigning authority. Meaning, if I tell you, hey, Gustavo, you have to go to the park and make sure the park is clean every day. Like you're on the Miami-Dade County Park Cleaning Committee. And all the people that work on the tractors and mowing the lawn and with the rake and doing the trees and all this kind of stuff, they don't report to you. So I'm giving you the responsibility to make sure the parks are clean, but you don't have any authority over the people who actually clean the parks. That's like setting you up for failure. So if you're going to delegate responsibility, make sure you delegate authority with it, if that makes sense. So that's when you get into delegation, the process that managers use to transfer authority and responsibility down the hierarchy. Line of authority, managers have formal authority to direct and control immediate subordinates. Staff authority, this is an interesting one because, okay, so I'll just read it and then we'll talk about it. Staff authority is narrow authority that includes the right to advise, recommend, and counsel in the staff specialist area of expertise. So let's look over here. The vice president has line authority. Let's go to the vice president of production as a different example. The vice president of production has line authority over the maintenance supervisor, the quality control manager, and the bottling plant superintendent. They have line authority, but they also have what would be called staff authority with the director of human resources, because they have to advise the director of human resources who they need to hire and how many people they have to hire, and maybe some of the credentials in which those people need to have. So there is a level of like staff authority over the decision of hiring, even though ultimately the director of human resources is going to make the yay or nay decision. The vice president has to advise. They use this terminology. They have to advise, recommend, and counsel in the staff specialist area of expertise. Is sort of there's a level of authority in that. Staff department, support line departments. I'll go back to this for a second, because production and human resources, this is a never-ending conflict. And same with marketing and marketing and production sometimes too. Like we'll say sales and production, because production has to actually make it, sales has to sell it, and there's conflict, and rightfully so. I mean, that conflict is okay, because there needs to be there's decisions of consequence that are being made. Span of management, the number of employees reporting to a supervisor. Let me ask an open-ended question, and we're almost done. So how many people do you think you can oversee logically? So you have, how many direct reports do you think you can logically manage? Yeah, so to move on, and it depends, I think is the right answer. It depends on the tasks. If they're mechanistic or routine tasks and they're fairly simple and people are trained, you could probably manage a good amount of people. But if there's intelligent work or more administrative work that needs to be strategized more often, and maybe you're managing other managers, the number's more like 6 to 10, and 10 is on a high side. It's more like 4 to 6 is what's appropriate for people that are working under you. Direct reports, and of course they can manage 4 to 6, and they can manage 10, and then those people can manage more. So, but it depends on the industry. It depends on the type of work. Less supervision, larger spans of management. There you go. So if there's less need to supervise, you could probably manage more people. And so that's when the work is stable and routine. Subordinates perform similar work in one location. Subordinates are highly trained. Rules and procedures are well defined, are defined. Support systems and personnel are available. There are few non-supervisory activities. Manager prefers a large span. You could also look at, when we talk about decision-making, there's a lot of programmed decisions. There's less non-programmed decisions. There's less decisions of consequence. Okay, if there's less decisions of consequence, there's more programmed decisions. I could probably manage more people. Tall structure is a span of management that is narrow and has many hierarchical levels. A flat structure, which I prefer, is a span of management that is wide and has few hierarchical levels. We'll look at a few of those in a second. Common structural problems is too many levels with a span that is too narrow. So I guess I'll ask, once we get to this point, and here's the two examples. What are some advantages to a tall structure? More top down. Throw it down. There might be less involvement. Decisions might be easier. How about clarity of, remember there, it says old here, which is telling, is that the world of organizational leadership is moving more to the new flat structure. And I'll tell you some of the reasons why. In the old tall structure, it's something called centralized decision-making. It's a top-down approach. It looks at, I want to say this isn't always the case, but sometimes people just become a product of, okay, I can't do that. The boss man says this and I just do what I'm told. And you kind of fall victim to this bureaucracy in a sense, which eliminates or takes away the competitive edge of creativity and innovation, and using the best of people, making sure that people are flourishing to their full potential, or given the opportunity to innovate and be creative and make decisions and this kind of stuff. So sometimes that's suppressed or subdued in tall structures, because there's such a chain of command that it's frustrating. It's just like, I'm never going to be able to do this because I got to get 15 approvals in order to get this done. So I'm just not going to do it. Why would I even put the effort in? Versus and that's not always the case. I want to give the benefit of the doubt to the people who lead tall structures in an old-fashioned way, that sometimes isn't always the case. You could very well lead an old tall structure format, and you can do it well, and people can still be creative. But there might be some things you have to put in place in order to make sure that happens. The new flat structure, though, demonstrates that. Look at the operating managers. They report to the president, and that's it. Like they have the direct chain of command directly up to the boss. And if they have some scrum or some sort of weekly meeting or whatever, they can voice their opinion and campaign for their cause very quickly. And it doesn't require a movement up the chain of command that takes weeks or months or never. So there's more creativity, there's more autonomy This word autonomy is used a lot these days. It's like freedom of thought and freedom of acting and being able to do what you need to do and sort of be your own boss. That happens more often in the new flat structures. Sometimes in the old structures, people just they think all they're supposed to do is walk around telling other people to do all day long, which sometimes is true. But the truth is, to be a good and effective leader, it's not about just walking around telling everyone what to do. It's walking around finding ways to eliminate obstacles so that they can do their job better. And that would mean that it's not walking around telling people what to do. It's walking around looking to help people solve problems. So when people approach the old tall structure in just a tyrannical way, it can be a problem. The new flat structure sort of eliminates the even possibility of that happening because everybody is sharing information with everybody and people can tell whether or not somebody's being ridiculous. Centralization versus decentralization of decision making. Centralization really means decision authority is located near the top of the organization. So one of the good things about a tall structure, an old structure, is that there's more control. There's more, nothing crazy is going to happen unless I approve it. So I want to make sure that, Johnny and Jill are giving me, that I have the ultimate press go button. So if I delegate or empower other people to do the press go button, then, sometimes they might not press go at the appropriate time. And it's interesting, but not interesting at the same time. So there's our nuclear missile program with the Cuban Missile Crisis is when you have to launch a missile, you have to put two keys in and you have to turn both the keys at the same time. And during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there's a reason for that. There's a lot of decision making that goes into prior to launching nuclear bombs, I'm sure. So again, not to over dramatize it, but during the Cuban Missile Crisis, get this, both keys were in. Think about that. Like we were that close to launching nuclear missiles and going into nuclear war because of this situation. And the point of me saying that is decision making is centralized sometimes for a reason. And it needs to be centralized for a reason because you can't have, Johnny Joe Blow making some important decision in your organization that is going to put everybody in jeopardy. So again, there's positive and negative. So decentralization is decision authority is pushed downward to lower organization levels. Factors that influence centralization: rapid change and uncertainty in the environment are associated with decentralization. So you want people to, I love this quote of, it's not the big that eat the small, but it's the fast that eat the slow. And what that means is the faster we can respond to the environment, the faster we can make some of these decisions better. And there's a great article that says from Harvard Business Review titled Speed as Strategy. Powerful article. Maybe we can look at it one day. But those kinds of companies that are decentralized, that can quickly respond and react, especially nowadays, tend to be the most successful. That's why we're moving from the old structure to the new structure, because it's about competitive advantage. Remember, we talked about strategic competitive advantage. We got to move. Speed as strategy. Okay. Is my 11 minutes up? Nope, got 4 minutes left. Departmentalization, important. We departmentalized our organization in 2016, right before Hurricane Irma, and thank God we did, because the amount of work we had to do in our company during and after Irma was huge. And how do you departmentalize? Departmentalize is grouping people together under a particular function, like the accounting department, the finance department, the human resources department, the sales department, this kind of stuff. Whereas sometimes it's not about the department, it's about, let's just say we work in pool repairs. Okay, like we figure out how to make it work with a customer service rep. Like we have our own division, not department, division on how we execute. And then we have the landscaping company and the landscape and the construction. So when we departmentalize, we brought together the core functions of accounting, the core functions of project management, the core functions of sales. And then those people supported all three different divisions. So we centralized some of the departments, and it sort of worked. So here's a couple ways to look at this: the vertical function, human resource, manufacturing, accounting; the divisional function, which is what I just talked about, the pool repairs division, the landscape division. So product division 1, product division 2, that's under number 2, divisional. And the matrix is actually a popular one. You actually, in a matrix structure, you report to 2 different people at the same time. Like I can work in the human resource department, but also report under product division 1. So I'm in product 1 under human resources, and I could be in product 1 in manufacturing, product 1 in accounting. So that's sort of a dual chain of command. Team-based, these are called, what are they called? Like highly effective teams, but there's a word to it. It's a specific type of deployment of teams for a specific goal, and then the team sort of goes away for a bit. But there's a team-based approach. I'll think of it in a second. It might even be on the next slide. And then there's this virtual network, which is real interesting. So the company that I work for, and I'll just briefly share the story and maybe one more slide and we're done. But I have I have experience instructing and teaching management leadership. That's awesome. And I have my own company. I have an LLC. So there's this company called LDR Leadership that has recruited and found me as a trainer for their company. So all they do is they're providing a network. They're providing a network where they have billing, they have operational resources where they establish the clients, they establish the relationship, they give me everything I need to be successful on my missions, and they do a really good job at it. But I don't actually work for them. So there's like a central hub, and then they outsource me as an instructor, and then they outsource their accounting to a company called Bill. Bill is a good company, and then they outsource their marketing and their social media. So all they have is like 4 people that actually work in this organization, but they have like 15 instructors, and they hire, I don't know, 25 subcontractors to actually perform the work, but they're not actually employees. So this model of virtual network company operating is happening much more nowadays. It's very similar to Uber. And Uber has employees, but for the majority of the time, the people that get paid by Uber don't actually have a W-2 from Uber. They're just independent contractors. So that's something to consider. Let me see if what do they call it, man? Special. Sorry, I'm gonna get to this one thing because it's cross-functional teams. Boom, that's it. Consist of employees from various functional departments who are responsible to meet as a team and resolve mutual problems. One book recommendation, then I'll say goodbye. There's a great book. I think it's General McChrystal who wrote a book called Team of Teams. And if you're in front of your computer, Amazon it, put it on your favorite list. It's a really good book, and it really talks about how the war in Afghanistan has changed the way the military will operate with counterterrorism, and using these small agile teams that can go places and do things with different types of specialties on them to accomplish a particular goal. And it's a really powerful book, and I highly recommend it, especially as a leader of teams. And so that's all I have to say about chapter 7. Let me show you my face, and then I'll say goodnight. Thank you. Thank you again for bearing with me from a distance. I got a sense that people were tuned in, and I recorded it, and I'll upload the recording to Canvas, and that's it.